In this episode of the Global Travel Channel podcast show, I'm going to be talking to someone who boarded a container ship in Asia and ended up in Australia. Hello and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. My name is Mark Philpott. On the show, I talk to people from across the world about all things related to travel, from amazing adventures to inspiring stories, to the not so well known destinations. We cover it all. You can find all of our previous podcast episodes on our Global Travel Channel website by visiting www.globaltravelchannel.com. The Global Travel Channel is a collaboration between travel writers, photographers, video makers, podcasters, and bloggers from across the world. We bring you information that we hope makes your next travel experience an awesome one, no matter where you decide to go to. You can also find the Global Travel Channel on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So be sure to subscribe, like, and follow us so that you can keep updated with our new content postings as and when they happen. You can even now support us through our Patreon page. For as little as the price of a cup of coffee per month, you can help us continue to produce the podcast show. So head on over to Patreon and type in Global Travel Channel Podcast Show. It's as simple as that. Now on to today's show. Have you ever imagined what it might be like to travel across the world aboard a real live working container ship? Well, it is possible, and on today's show, I'm going to be talking with someone who's done just that. Let's welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show, Donna Salter. Donna, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show, and I should say welcome back because you've been on the show before.
Great to talk to you again.
And for the sake of all of our listeners across the 68 countries of the world that we go to so far, Donna was one of our wonderful guests before, talking about her amazing house-sitting journey across the world. And what country are you sitting in today talking to us from, Donna?
Today I'm in Ireland.
In beautiful Ireland. Now, there's probably a 90% chance that it's raining outside today. Is that right?
It's raining and very blustery. So, but that's, I actually was very lucky. I got here and I got 4 days of sunshine because apparently the end of a hurricane in the United States was pushing warm air here. So I got the treat of having 4 days of sunshine, but now it's back to the usual.
Well, that 4 days probably won't come for another few centuries. So the Irish will be hanging out for it again, I'm sure.
It's very beautiful here, though. Even when it's raining, it's lovely.
Now, you were telling me just before we came on air that you've got a rather desperate coffee situation going on this morning.
I got up early. I had the coffee maker, but I'm house sitting, so I don't know all of these things. And suddenly a warning light came on, and I'm reading through the manual, and it says I must clean the diffuser, and I'm trying to read these instructions. And there's a cat here who thinks that she's a princess, and so she is meowing that I have to come and sit with her and while she eats, and she did that about 6 times. So it's been a very interesting morning because she gets very loud if she doesn't get her way.
Well, I've got Oscar sitting at my feet, and if he hears any cat noises, we'll have a bit of a debacle going on, that's for sure.
Well, hopefully everything's calm now. I have a cup of tea instead of coffee, but we're good.
Very good. Well, last time you were on the show, we were talking about house sitting. Today, we're going to be talking about shooting across the world on a container ship, crossing oceans, karaoke nights, and tons more. So there's lots to get through today. But first of all, I want you to explain to the audience this opportunity to actually go on a cargo ship. How did that actually come up for you, and what inspired it?
Well, I love boats, and I love slow travel, I guess is the way to put it. So I've traveled on sailboats across oceans and on cruise ships once. And but I became really fascinated with it after seeing Captain Phillips, and I was just
I was going to
obsessed.
ask you about
I
that.
was obsessed with this movie. I probably watched that movie like 20 times, and I thought, boy, that it just looks like such an interesting facility.
Mm,
And so
mm,
I started exploring it, and I was lucky enough to get in touch with a guy named Hamish Jamison, who is in New Zealand,
mm,
and he um, sort of guided me through. There's not a lot of agencies that book these things. There's a couple of others, but some of them ask you for money up front, and he was just really good about helping me through the whole process. And it is kind of a process because you have to have doctor's letters and immunization
mm,
and so on.
mm,
And, forwarded me all the forms and so on. And I
mm.
wasn't able to make it on my first ship. I was supposed to go from Los Angeles to Southeast Asia, but I had an emergency, so I wasn't able to make that. And he really had done so much work, I felt terrible because I had to cancel. So when I was in Southeast Asia, I contacted him again to say I'm still interested in this, and he said, "Oh, I've got the boat for you," and he did. So um, that's how I got started.
Fantastic. Now, I'm sure a lot of the listeners are thinking, hey, that's a really potential cool way to travel. Is it available to everyone and anyone? Do you have to fit a certain criteria to go on a cargo ship?
Well, you have, um,
Hmm.
and fit enough to.
Does
I
that mean
mean,
you have to do a fitness examination of some kind,
no,
or?
but you have to be able to go up and down stairs. The gangway is very steep, and that's how you get onto the boat. It's not like walking onto a cruise ship.
Mm,
You
mm,
you have to be able to walk around the ship, and you have to not have any chronic conditions that would be a problem, like if because there's no doctor on board, so you have to understand that, and you have to have um, all of your immunizations up to date, and you have to have a yellow fever shot, which a lot of people don't have and is quite dangerous for people who are older like myself.
mm,
So if you don't have a yellow fever shot, you have to have a waiver,
mm.
because yellow fever is a live vaccine, and so it can make people sick. So those are the main things that you have to have, and you have to sign. You have to have insurance, obviously, and
Mm.
so there's a lot of paperwork up front that you have to agree to before you can do this.
Is the insurance something that's rather difficult due to the fact that you have to declare that the nature of your travel, like you're going on a cargo ship versus going on a regular cruise liner? How does that differ from an insurance point of view, or does it differ?
It doesn't differ because you've just got, I mean, you have regular travel insurance, and presumably you have medical insurance in order to get your regular travel insurance, or have medical and travel insurance together. So it really doesn't, they just want to see proof that you have insurance.
Mm, okay. And when you talked about wanting to take your time going from place to place, and I guess smelling the roses, one could say, and to use an analogy, why did you choose a cargo ship versus going on a regular cruise ship?
Well, first of all, I'm a sailor, so we call anything with a motor stink pots. But sailors generally look down their nose at ships and things like that, and I really don't like that way of travel. I will say this though, I have been on a cruise ship once, and I had a blast. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet of sort of debauchery, but to me the it's not the way to travel. It's that it's sort of like taking your hotel with you and your country. So I've also been I've been to places like Venice where cruise ships descend, and just uh, it's a disaster. In many places
Mm,
it's become a disaster, and Oya in Santorini, another
mm,
place that's been really hampered by cruise ships, or in some cases really destroyed by cruise ships. So I don't like that way of travel. I think you should try to
mm,
leave a smaller footprint.
mm. It's interesting. Whenever I talk to someone about going on a cruise ship, the first thing that's always mentioned is the food.
Yeah, well, and you're guaranteed to gain, 10 kilos on a cruise. So,
Wow.
um, but freighter isn't, the food is really good on a freighter, so um, you're not going to lose any weight there either.
Here's a random question for you that just came into my mind. Do cruise ships allow animals to go on board yet?
I don't know. I don't. I would imagine so. I don't know. There's probably some specialized cruises that allow pets of some sort. And I don't know about there, but in America, a lot of people have their pets classified as therapy animals. And
Mm.
so,
Mm.
that's like having a seeing eye dog or something like that. And
Mm.
it's not necessarily true, but so if you have a therapy animal, I think they have to let you on with a pet. I don't know. I
Well,
don't know.
Oscar's just looked up at me and he's shaking his head. We're not going on a cruise ship, so he's not excited about that at all. Now, how long did that process take for you to arrange actually getting everything in order and getting the booking done and being confirmed to go on the ship? What was it? Weeks, months, years? How long was it
No,
to do that?
I mean, you could probably, I mean, if you, because you have to download a lot of stuff, you have to, and because I'm mobile, you have to print a
Mm.
lot of stuff. So I would have to download it, take it to the print shop, fill it out, take it back, have it scanned, and so on. And you have to be somewhat computer literate to do that. But you could do it.
Mm.
You could do it in, I mean, you have to go to the doctor. So that takes whatever time that takes, because you have to have a letter from the doctor saying that you're physically okay. Um,
Mm.
and you have to get an immunization or
Mm-hmm.
multiple immunizations if you aren't up to date. So I would say you should give it, depending on how long your doctor's visit would take, it can take a week or two.
Mm, okay. And once the application's put forward, is it kind of a fait accompli at that stage that you've got the booking, or do you have to wait for them to decide that you've been assessed certainly and the boxes are ticked and they give you a confirmation? Is that how it works?
I think they give you a confirmation pretty quickly, and that's where Hamish comes in because he kind of guides you through the process. And then if they make any requests, he passes them along to you
Mm,
and, helps you get whatever paperwork you need.
okay. This famous Hamish chap in New Zealand, is he like a broker or something, is he?
Yeah, if you look up Hamish Jamison under freighter travel, and I emailed him yesterday ahead of time and asked if I could mention his name. But
Mm,
he's kind of the guy that does it. I mean, I did contact other agencies, and nobody got back to me. So, and you can't contact the freighter companies directly. They don't. It doesn't work that way.
okay. Hamish, I know that you're probably listening to this now, so therefore I'll just say you're welcome for all the business we've just sent your way from Donna's recommendation, and we'll catch up when we come over to New Zealand, Hamish. Now, your particular journey, Donna, where did you start from? What was the origin, port and country of origin?
I started from Singapore, and we then went to Kuala
So
Lumpur.
you had to get there. So where were you before you went to Singapore? Were you already in Singapore?
Mm, now that makes me think. Where was I?
Mm,
I was probably in Thailand. I think
hmm.
probably in Thailand.
And how long do they give you to notify you that, okay, this is where the ship's going to depart from and you need to be there by a certain hour at a certain date?
Well, this is a
What's
pretty regular. This ship goes, I think, weekly. So it's
Oh,
a
okay.
pretty regular route for them,
Uh-huh.
and you have to be there about 48 hours before travel time because there really isn't. You don't. They don't know when they're going to leave. They'll leave when they're loaded.
Mm,
So you just have to make arrangements, and you can once you're there. It's a little bit hard to schedule because they come from somewhere else or whatever. But this one leaves from Singapore, and they just call you when they're ready for you, and so you just have to be there.
Okay. So for somebody who's wanting to do this, you need to have a degree of flexibility in your own schedule. So when that call comes through, that you can bolt to wherever you need to go to from wherever you are.
That's
Because let's
right.
face it, not everybody's going to be sitting in the country where the port is
No, you
legal
have
from,
to,
right?
I would say you have to give yourself 3 days on either side.
Okay, that's cool. So you were just about to tell us after leaving Singapore, and first of all, tell us about the journey of actually, going to the wharf and getting on the boat and ship, because I guess it's a different experience. It's not like, do you go through the normal sort of customs procedures as you would going through an airport and that sort of thing, or how does that work?
Well, a ship, shipyard dock freighter facility is a secure facility, as you might know. So you go there, you have all your paperwork, um, and then you gates and you take, they drive you to the boat and you're sort of escorted by somebody on the boat and you go through customs and everything else. And then they keep your passport while you're on board. Um,
Mm.
and then when you get to the next port, they will call you at some point and you will meet with customs in the office, in the ship's
Mm.
office. And
Okay. So I guess it's not like the Love Boat where you don't have a little guy with a fanfare and a whole lot of dancing girls and that welcoming you on board. It's probably a lot of guys in overalls and greasy hands and lifting boxes and all that sort of stuff, is it?
well, they work when they're in port. That's, when you're on the ship, there's really, they do some maintenance work and stuff like that. But when they're in port, they're working. So everybody's busy at that
Mm.
point. They kind
Mm.
of show you to your room, give you the schedule for meals,
Mm.
and you know it's a they tell you you can go everywhere, and they're very nice, but they're busy. So
Mm.
for the first day or so, they don't.
So I'm interested to know, did they go through any kind of safety procedure with you? Is it, fold your tray tables up, make sure your overhead luggage is in the compartment and away you go? Or do they show you life
Yep,
jackets
you
and
have
all the boats and
a
all that?
life jacket, and they show you where the lifeboat is, and you have safety equipment in your stateroom, and
Mm-hmm.
a flotation suit, I think, in your stateroom as well. And they go over it pretty lightly while you're in port, and then later on a little bit more.
You were saying you left Singapore. Now, Singapore is one of the busiest ports in the world. It's in a very dynamic crossroads of ocean traffic. So I'm sure it was pretty exciting coming out of there.
Well, coming out, I didn't notice so much traffic, but we went up to Kelang in near Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And I didn't know that we were coming back. Of course, I hadn't looked at a map. I didn't know we were coming back through. So when we came back through, all of a sudden I noticed the traffic because there is,
Mm.
we weren't coming out of port. We were just going. And it's a
Mm.
very, very busy port. And there's islands, there's little boats, there's big boats, there's freighters everywhere. It's pretty
Mm.
hairy in that, right around there. And that was the first time I
Mm.
was really kind of, wow, this is really a lot of work.
Mm.
But and then then you go further, Sunda Strait, which is really crazy. So it's interesting to watch
Mm.
these
Mm.
guys maneuver with all of the action going on. And the port of Singapore, I remember that very well because the captain was running back and forth across the T bridge, like guys fishing without little tiny boats. And you're on this giant freighter and it's moving, and they
Mm.
have
Mm.
to avoid you, you know.
Mm.
So
So how big was this thing? Like, can you give us any sense of dimensions and size?
Uh, I think it was tons, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
actually, I couldn't actually prepare for that question, but it was like, you see freighters, it was like an apartment building.
Mm. Mm. So it was a
Um,
massive, massive ship.
it's a massive ship, and it's about, I don't know, 10, 11 stories high,
Mm.
and it's a very, very large boat. And it's not one of the biggest ones, actually, because now they're coming up with these super freighters that are,
Mm.
I, I, I just can't imagine these things maneuvering around anything.
Mm.
And as a sailor, I have heard stories of sailboats ending up as hood ornaments on them because they're they just don't see all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the little Chinese guy in his fishing boat off the coast of Singapore had no chance if this thing was bearing down on him. Yeah.
Well, and he didn't. The freighter moved because the captain was giving directions like, "Oh, there's somebody in the way, move!" And there's all eyes are on when you're going through that. Everybody is watching. You've got the cadets are watching. You've got the captain. Everybody is looking out for
Did
stuff.
you leave Singapore in the nighttime, or was it during the day?
It was early in the morning.
And as you said, you headed up the west coast of Malaysia. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then you came back down through the Straits of Singapore and headed which direction from there?
We headed south. Indonesia, which was Sumatra was on our right, and I think Borneo and Kalimantan was on our left. And then we passed through the Straits of Sunda, which then you're by Java. And then you're in open ocean after that.
Okay. And what was the sense of being on the vessel in terms of, I guess they don't have a lot of crew on these ships, do they, for the size of them? But were you walking around all day and checking it out, or what was your daily routine aboard?
Meals are served at certain times. And so my day kind of revolved around food. I really liked breakfast because they would sometimes serve hot croissants and they always served fresh bread and really good coffee. And, and then there would be eggs and other things for breakfast, yogurt and jam and stuff like that.
Was breakfast served at the same time every day?
Yeah, because the mess is cooking for all of the crew and me. I was the only passenger. So there are certain set times for breakfast. I mean, it's a little flexible. It's like 7 to 9. And the same for lunch, had set hours. And so you would just go down when you felt like it.
If a couple wanted to go on a trip like this, would they be allowed to do so or not? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Apparently there could be, there's enough rooms, like staterooms for several passengers. And the staterooms are very much more roomy than what you would get on a cruise ship. They have, king size or queen size beds. And there's a sofa and chair and a desk, and you have a private bathrooms, and there's laundry facilities. So your room is the cabin is very, very comfortable. So yeah, there wouldn't be a problem with a couple at all.
Okay, good.
Or even a family, I would think.
Now, you're somebody that's very familiar with the ocean and being a sailor and all the rest of it, and you've been on a cruise ship before, but how was the overall size and capacity of the ship? Was it overwhelming when you first went up to the bridge just to see how magnificently huge these things are and how far above the water they are?
Yeah, I think the bridge really impressed me because they have a lot of equipment. But it was the ship I was on was a little bit older, so you'd see a lot more. The equipment was up to date, but it had it looked sort of like early 2000s or something like that, but they have computers and everything else on it. But I think what really impressed me more than the bridge, even though I spent most of my time up there, was the foredeck, because it was just, first of all, it was dead quiet up there. In the other parts of the ship, the boxes, as they call the containers, are kind of formed like canyons. So there's a lot of clanging and noise and wind going through. But when you get up to the foredeck of the ship, it's silence. And it's very, I compared it to a cathedral because it was very quiet. And, you look at the size of the ropes and the anchor chains and the anchors, and the equipment is all just, it would make a sailboat look like a dollhouse. It's just, so I'm very fascinated by this sort of equipment. So it was really, that was very impressive. and the engine room. But I liked going up to the foredeck because there's nobody up there when you're not, when you're not docking or anything. And you can climb up the steps and you can look over the bow to the bulb. And if you're lucky, you'll. And I saw a couple of whales as well.
Terrific. Now, you were telling us before I rudely interrupted about your daily schedule, and we got as far as breakfast. So what would you typically do after you've had breakfast on any given day?
Well, I was there kind of to write and get myself organized, and there was no Wi-Fi, so I did a lot of writing and I did a lot of reading, and sometimes I would just go for a walk around the ship, and then I would sit, if it was a pleasant day, I'd sit and sun myself, and I read book after book after book. It was great. I mean, because it was very weird being disconnected from the internet. They do have Wi-Fi and you can get it, but I had some trouble getting it. And after a day or so, when I realized how much I was reading, I thought, I'm just going to disconnect. So it was like a break from news and, the constant pinging and buzzing of the world. It was just like a chance to relax, and I didn't care what was going on because I didn't know.
So tell us about that, because that's really fascinating to me in terms of just being able to completely switch off to that outside world. Did it take you a couple of days to adjust to that, or did you pretty much slot it straight into that style?
No, because, I remember what I remember most. I did a transatlantic on a small sailboat many years ago. And what I remember about that was the complete feeling of freedom that I had once we left sight of land. And that was before the internet. But it was like, you're out here and you're an island, and it's just the most quiet that you can have. And so I felt I relaxed into it right away. And I probably haven't read a book in an afternoon, well, since the internet was invented, because, I have to check things. It's very important that I check things. And so that was a real pleasure, having a book and reading all the way through it in an afternoon, and then having a nap.
Now, we all know that going on vacation, we tend to become different types of people because we're having different types of experiences. I'm hearing here that this is a ultimate trip to take if one wants to chill out and calm down and take a breath and watch the sunrises and sunsets. Is that the best way to describe it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. I mean, there's some social activities on the ship during the period that you're there, but and there is a pool and a gym, although it's pretty smelly.
I was going to say, you said that with some kind of fervor. Tell us a bit more about the gym.
It's pretty smelly. There's 32 guys on the boat, and it's like a gym from 1962. So I mean, they did have yoga mats, which would be what my exercise would be, but I preferred walking around the boat rather than going to the gym and doing yoga. I didn't feel like doing much of anything, actually, so pretty lazy.
How long did it take to do a lap of the boat by walking?
Well, it's not a lap. It's kind of, you go from end to end on one side. You go up because the boxes are shoved on the other side. I'm sure that there's places that you can go, but I never went there. I just went along. How long would it take to get up to the foredeck? I don't know, maybe 7 minutes, something like that.
Okay, still a good walk.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not like just going across the street. You actually get a bit of exercise out of it.
Different scenery on different decks, so you can go to different ones, and there's like a little library and a lounge and stuff like that. So you can go, you can make yourself a cup of coffee.
What did most of the crew do when they had their time off? Were they using those facilities and going to the pool and the gym, or were they just vanished and you didn't really see much of them?
I did see some of them using the pool on a hot day. They were sort of roughhousing and doing cannonballs and stuff like that. It's a small pool, and it's quite cold because it's small and deep and they fill it from the ocean. There were organized events, and that's when you saw the crew. But I think mostly they worked shift work, and so they were sleeping. You know, you didn't see too many of them unless they were doing some maintenance painting or something like that. But the only place I saw them really was in the engine room.
So tell us about the engine room. You had an opportunity to go down and do a tour there. That must have been hugely impressive.
Well, I used to write machine manuals, so I'm very impressed with machines anyway. And so this is just like a very, very, very big machine. And I was just amazed. Again, it was like the anchors and the anchor chains. I was amazed at the size of everything. You know, like the propeller shaft was like a huge tree running the length of this boat, and the pistons were like the size of small cars, and it was really noisy. So you had to wear ear protection, and it was multiple stories, you know, so it was up and down stairs, and I was with the chief engineer, and you know, I would try to ask him questions, but it would sometimes be so noisy that he couldn't answer. And he was very pleased that I was interested, because you know, I think probably some passengers would go on and just not be interested in the engine so much, but that was the part that.
How was the noise in general in the rest of the parts of the ships? For instance, in your room, was it a noisy environment from the ship's screws and stuff?
Well, the original cabin I was in, I had 2 refrigeration units outside of my windows. And when they would kick on, they would be a little noisy, you know, like a car running or something like that. And so I could close the portholes if I wanted. But sometimes I like to have the portholes open. There's, you know, quite a lot of sort of, it really depended on the weather, wind blowing and so on, you know, just normal ship sounds. After the first party, the captain was convinced by the crew that I should be upgraded. So I moved up to the next deck up, so I could see, so I had a clear ocean view, and it was quite noisy up there. It was because you got more of the wind and so on. The wind was sort of buffeted by the boxes in front of my windows on the deck below. So, but I liked it. I liked the sound of wind and ships in general. So
I guess the next question is going to be for those people that are sitting out there listening and going, yeah, I'd love to do this, but I get seasick. And how's the motion of a ship of this size? Was it generally pretty good?
Generally, we had one day where we were trying to outrun a storm. And so the ship was going fast and the water was pretty rough. And I normally never get seasick, but I was I was off that day. I really was, because even, you know, walking in the hall, sometimes the ship would lurch a little bit and you'd fall to the side. So, you know, I'm sure it can get rough. That was the only rough day we had. And I did feel a little ill. I didn't, you know, I mean, not enough to stop me from eating, but
good.
Yeah.
Now, we told everybody where you left from, but what was the destination going to be? Where were you
Our
heading to?
first port of call was Fremantle beside Perth. And our next port of call was Sydney, where I was getting off. And after Sydney, they went to Melbourne. And I wish I'd stayed on till Melbourne, because I really, I missed the boat. And I didn't, you know, I miss being on the boat. And could have just driven up from Melbourne to Sydney. But so those were, the next destination was Fremantle.
So let's talk about time-wise. How long did it take you to transit from Singapore down to Fremantle? How many days was it?
I think it was about a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did life aboard the ship change for you each day, or did it change? Did you get into a pattern where it became more and more relaxing, more and more nice? You just mentioned that you missed it when you left, but how was it during? Could you feel yourself slipping more and more into ship life as you do on these ventures?
Yeah, I was more relaxed, and I was, you know, I was more adventurous, because at first I was a little bit intimidated by it, and so I didn't walk around as much as I could have, and I was doing a lot of writing and reading. But then you know, it was just sort of, it became like, like when you start a new job and you're not familiar with the facility, and so you get lost, and you kind of have to explore, and then after a while you get to know the place, and you can wander around and think, oh, I'll go see that today, and oh, I wonder what's happening over there, and I'll have a look at that. So yeah, it became quite familiar and very comfortable, and everybody was so nice to me. When I did encounter anyone, so they were all very kind and, asked me if they could help. Well, one time I got locked out and they wouldn't let me in without the code. They had to go get somebody. But other than that, they were very nice. Yes.
Now, you talked about your favorite seafaring movie at the beginning of the episode today, Captain Phillips. And did you have to do any practicing of lifeboats or anything during the trip?
No, because we weren't really. And there are pirate boats that come through, and the captain does read those. And the only time I know that there are pirates in Indonesia, because I've sailed in Indonesia. I was going to ask about that next. So the pirates reports will come through and tell you if there's any activity in the area, and there was no activity in the area. We did see some offshore oil platforms in Indonesia, and they were trolled by these very serious looking black boats with men toe to toe in black with masks over their face and big guns, and they had like machine guns and things like that. So obviously there's some danger. I mean, they do get there have been pirate attacks. So but we had nothing of that sort, but I actually asked the captain specifically about that, because I asked him if he'd seen that movie, and he said he had, and he said he would not go in that area anymore. He would not sail in that area anymore. He would not take assignments there, and so he was obviously well aware of that, and he said it was a frightening place. So, but
interesting.
Yeah. So, but none of that is. I think in the area we were in, there was no pirate activity. But I would go and read the pirate reports because I thought they were interesting.
Probably a note to self, to everybody listening: don't watch Captain Phillips before you go on a cargo ship cruise. Just as a bit of
no, it's preparation. You'll know what to do.
Yeah, true.
Break glass when you're hiding out in the engine room.
That's it. Now, you talked briefly there about the captain. Tell us a bit more about him. Did you get to sit down and have dinner with him, have a chat about his ship and his life at sea?
Yes, I did. It was very funny because when I first got on the ship, I was up at the bridge a lot, and as people would come and go, they would I introduce myself and they would introduce themselves, and I said, hello, I'm Donna, and he said, I am Captain. And I thought, okay. And I knew his name because he was Captain, and I think a couple of days later, and because I heard the senior crew call him his first name, whereas everybody else called him Captain. And I think I remember I called him by his first name a few days later, just by accident, really. I just, and I remember him sort of flinching. but by
She found out my name. Who told her my name?
But by the end...
Was he French?
Yes, he was very French.
He was French. Nailed it in one.
Many of the crew were French, or the senior crew, the officers and the cadets were all French. But... no, he was an interesting guy, and he'd had an interesting past, and he did warm up, and he had parties. We had parties together and dinners together on shore and drinks together on shore. So he was a nice guy.
Terrific. How long had he been at sea for? He must have been at sea for quite a number of years.
Yes, he had been. First of all, you have to train to become a ship's captain. Is a little like becoming a doctor. I mean, it takes a long time. And he had a sort of a checkered youth, so it had taken him a while to get his captain's license. It takes a long time, and he had been at sea he was almost 60, so he had probably been at sea for 30 some years.
I've always been in awe of these captains, whether they be male or female, because they are in charge of such an extraordinary huge piece of equipment, and you can only imagine that if something goes wrong, it goes very wrong, as we saw recently with that cruise ship in Venice. Yeah, it's just they're just so massive, these
They're
things.
massive, and on the day that I was telling you about that we were outrunning a storm, he was up at the bridge, which was unusual. The captain doesn't go up to, he goes up to the bridge when you're in port and so on. But that day I went up and he was up at the bridge, and I said, "Ooh, little rough today." And he said, "Yeah, we're running." And he was on the phone a lot with France, where they're tracking all of the ships, and they were, telling him to slow down because he was burning through fuel at a tremendous amount. And he said, "I can't slow down because if I slow down, the storm's going to get us." And then, and he said, "And that's where you lose boxes." And I asked him if he'd ever lost a box, and he said no. But there's been a couple of accidents recently where you've seen, freighters on fire or cars go off, or things fall in the ocean, and it's not an uncommon thing.
I'm sure the guy's not going to sit there and go, "Yeah, Donna, I lost 100 boxes last week." It's a bit like asking a policeman on a motorbike if he's ever sped, like, yeah, of course I've lost boxes, Donna, I just can't tell you about it.
I never thought of that. Okay. So I'm a sucker.
That's a funny one, though. That's a good one. So you got to dine with them. Did you get to know any of the other crew very well during the trip? Were there some that were a bit more extroverted than others that came and talked and told you about their life?
Well, there were two cadets, and they reminded me of my sons because they were the same age as my sons, and they were exceedingly polite, and I'd ask them a few questions, but they didn't speak great English, and so French was the language spoken on board. And I don't speak great French. I understand it well enough, but I have a horrible accent, so I try not to offend anybody's ears. I got, I spent a lot of time talking to the second engineer, a little bit of time talking the first mate, and about what their responsibilities were. And and then Ronald, the steward, one of his daughters in the Philippines was having a birthday, and he was FaceTiming her. And so he wanted me to go on FaceTime. Now, I don't speak Tagalog, but he had his wife and both his daughters, and they were waving at me and, "Oh, so happy to talk to me." And and he was so proud. He was meeting all of these international people, and I thought that was pretty funny. So, yeah.
Was there, well, there was, because you had told me about it previously, there was a fantastic karaoke night one night, is that right?
Yeah, there was a champagne night. It was the first big party, and that was just for the senior officers and the cadets, and like the second engineers and so on. And that was the party where the crew got quite drunk and made the captain agree to move me up to a better view. And I didn't think that was going to happen because I think everybody was pretty drunk. But that was a lovely party, and there was Moet champagne and shrimp, buttered shrimp and canapes, and it was quite lovely. And there was some singing and so on. And then karaoke night was a big, huge barbecue on the foredeck, and the entire crew was at that party, and it was the food was amazing, and the crew was funny. So they put out a big banquet, and they do a couple of small suckling pigs and on the grill, and they have tons of prawns and chicken that you can barbecue, and they just have a big party. And the captain says a few words and thanks the crew and so on, and then more beer, more wine, more drinking, and then some karaoke, and everybody was up for that, and that was pretty entertaining. I mean, there were some good singers, some really bad singers, and then there was the entire crew doing their rendition of YMCA, which was hilarious because they were all trying to do the, first of all, some of them don't even have those letters in their alphabet, so they don't even really know what they're singing about or doing necessarily. But it was kind of like watching a flock of geese trying to take off with, like, I mean, almost the entire crew was doing the dance and 4 guys were singing, but they were all trying to do the dance. It was hilarious.
Doesn't karaoke bring out the best in people?
Or the worst.
You said it,
The chief engineer did not have a great voice, but he made up for it in volume.
I love the analogy. They look like a flock of geese trying to take off. I love that. It's fantastic. Now, what was it like when, now you, again, you're somebody that's been at sea quite a lot. So for somebody who's listening, who's, thinking, well, this would be really cool. What were some of the other highlights? I guess seeing land coming into Fremantle, seeing land as you approached Australian coastline would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, you're looking for that, and you're looking for it, and then it was dawn, I guess, and I had gotten up to watch the sunrise, and all of a sudden you just see a very thin line, and you think, oh, that's it, that's Australia. And I would look at charts and maps to see where we were and so on. And the guys always found it very interesting that I knew how to read a chart. But yeah, you see.
Did you have something in your room that you could track the ship's progress from inside your room?
No. But my room was just, down the hall from the bridge, so I just go up there. They had I didn't need anything, and I had full access to everything in the bridge. I could look at whatever they were looking at. So, but yeah, I mean, it was beautiful to see Australia. I'd never been there, so I was very excited to go there. And the 2 cadets that was their first big trip, so they were very excited and had the binoculars out and were looking as well.
How was it coming into Fremantle Harbour and going through the whole process of unlocking the boxes, not unlocking them, unloading the boxes and reloading again? How was that? Because I imagine, you don't get to see obviously any of that on a cruise line, but on a cargo ship, it's all about function and speed and getting these ships moving on. So was that an impressive sight to watch?
Well, I think the most fascinating thing to me was I didn't know that they sent a pilot boat out and another guy drove the boat into port. I mean, I'm sure that had also happened in Singapore and Malaysia. I just wasn't aware of it because I didn't know the crew at that time. So I just assumed it was a guy that worked on the boat driving the boat. But in Australia, all of a sudden there's a guy on the bridge with an Australian accent, and I'm like, where did he come from? And and so I asked about this, and Fremantle is a very tight port, and they're talking about bringing these bigger boats in, and I couldn't believe. I mean, how this guy maneuvered this boat into place was beyond me. And but I was more. There was another ship in there, and it was kind of listing to one side and looked very unusual. And I said, what kind of ship is that? And the pilot said, oh, that's a ship that's in trouble. And I said, well, what? Because it didn't look like any ship I'd ever seen. It had like a lot of portholes, and it was a big, like, freighter type thing. Oh, he said, you've missed them, but they'll be back. The demonstrators were here. Well, it turned out that this was a live sheep ship that went to the Middle East. And there had been big protests because somebody had taken a video on board. And he said, that'll be on TV tonight. And I'm going, oh yeah, big news story in Fremantle, not knowing that this was really a controversial issue in Australia.
Absolutely.
And it was on 60 Minutes. When I got to Sydney, I went on YouTube and I looked up 60 Minutes and I looked up this sheep ship, and there were a lot of protests, and the boat was being held in quarantine, and there were a lot of dead sheep on board. And so it was a big deal. So that was interesting I ended up sort of investigating that a little bit more because live transport of animals is quite controversial.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And how quickly did it take them to turn around the ship in Fremantle before you were heading off again?
2.5 days.
Okay.
So we arrived in the morning at probably like noonish, and then by the time everything was settled and customs had come and so on, I think we were, because I went into town with the captain and the chief engineer, and I think we were off the boat by about 3. And then we took the train into Perth and went and had dinner.
So from Perth you went, or from Fremantle, which is just 27.5 kilometres south of Perth, how long did it take you to get over to Sydney?
It was a couple of days. And I just want to add about the pilot, because I became fascinated with this pilot. So when the pilot came on to move us out of the Fremantle port, I asked him if I could if I could go with him to get on the pilot boat when he was leaving. And he said, oh, yeah, sure. And so I went into a part of the boat I'd never been in. And there's literally a hole in the side of a freighter. And they lower this kind of balcony, and the guy jumps on a speeding boat. I'm like, this is the craziest job. Like, who would take that job? It just didn't make it. So that was very fascinating to me. And then, yeah, so a couple of days up to Sydney.
Hang on. Did you ask the guy how many times he's missed?
Well, he would have lied, just like the boxes, right? Never.
Port Botany. Ah, that's right. Yeah, right.
Yeah. You don't go to nice harbors. you go to the places where they hide the freighters, you know. So it would have been lovely to sail under the harbor bridge or something, but no, that's not how it happens.
So you were out by the airport.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting because when you're in port, when you're tied up in port, there's nobody on the bridge, and that's always a weird sensation. So I think I got up very early, and there's just nobody, and they haven't started moving stuff. And what really impressed me about Australia too was that in all of the other ports, it had just been all males. And when I went down to get off the boat in Sydney, there was a mass of women stevedores, which I thought was pretty cool. But actually in Sydney Harbor, I found this out shortly the day that we were loading. The ship had already left, and I'd already left, and I was driving. But there was quite a bad accident, and a woman fell from one of the towers, or one of the I don't know even what you call them, but anyway, the towers that do the loading and operate the cranes and so on. Somebody fell down and was very badly injured. So accidents do happen, but I was impressed that there were so many women working in both of those ports.
Very good. Well done, Australia, Lee.
Yes.
Now, we're coming towards the end of our chat today, so before I let you go, I'd like you to share with the audience, what were your 3 top highlights of this trip?
Food was very, very good and very, very plentiful. And at lunch and dinner, they served wine. So at each meal, you got a half a bottle of wine. And there was a duty-free shop that they opened once. And so, you know, I mean, you lined up with the crew, and you could buy things very, very cheaply. So you could buy yourself, if you wanted wine or, you know, special water or soda or whatever. So there was a duty-free shop. And again, the food was very, very good. And as far as the highlight, you know, the highlight had to have been karaoke night, but overall, it was a really, really great experience. And you know, one of the things at sea that you see when you're out at sea, you don't have light pollution. And so I had some nights just gazing at the stars and being amazed at the sky, because there's just nothing, and it's black, and the skies were just glittering with stars. So there were nights when I would just go up there and I would just go, wow. You know,
magical experience. That sounds. Now, people are wanting me to ask this question. How does it compare from a cost point of view to do a trip like this versus taking a cruise ship, for instance? Is it comparable in terms of a day-by-day cost as far as budget goes?
Well, the costs are between $100 and $125 dollars, US dollars per day, depending on
Per day.
the boat you're in.
Okay.
At least that's what I determined from doing research on it. So when you think of this is your, first of all, it's your travel, it's your accommodation, and it's 3 very good meals a day and some wine. So, I mean, I don't, you know, if you're going on a vacation, you're going to spend that easily. So I think it's quite good from a cost perspective.
So you didn't have to pay any extra once you were on board? You didn't have to pay for drinks and things like that? That was all included in your price?
Everything was included. And as I say, you know, if you wanted to have, say you wanted to have an extra drink or a beer or something like that, you could buy it from the duty-free shop. So all of the officers bought, you know, good booze. I mean, obviously the chief officers don't have to pay for anything. And they always had like beer in their fridge. So if you'd go to visit them, they'd say, you know, you want a beer.
Yeah.
And then the regular crew mostly brought beer and cigarettes. Oh, I should mention the cigarettes too. And then the Filipinos bought orange soda and Head and Shoulders. They were sending their money home. But I should mention the cigarettes because the one thing, I mean, the first cabin I had, there is smoking is allowed on the boat, but you must smoke in your cabin. So if you are, the cabins have been smoked in. I'll just tell you that. The first cabin I was in had been smoked in a lot, and pretty much everybody on the boat smoked. So if you are deathly allergic to cigarette smoke, that's going to be a problem. The second cabin I was in had not been smoked in as much. So that was, that's something that people should know because I don't know, maybe some places have non-smoking boats, but I doubt that you'd get many sailors on them. But that is one of the issues.
I was going to ask you actually, was there anything about the trip you didn't actually enjoy or something that, in addition to what you've just said, that you could make listeners aware of that they should take into consideration doing a trip like this?
I don't think there was one thing about that trip that I didn't enjoy. Frankly, I consider that one of the best trips I've ever taken. And I've taken a lot of trips.
Are you likely to do another one, do you think?
I would love to do another one. I would love to find a way to do that for a year. Just travel around the world and believe me, I'm working on thinking of that. I think it would be great. If I had a choice, if I had known that was a career, well, I don't think I would have been hired anyway because I'm of a certain age, and at that time it probably wouldn't have been an option for me. But that, you know, that would have been a path I would have taken. I just think I thought it was great.
Well, I've got a couple of ideas I'll share with you offline about how you could do it full time. So I might be able to give you a couple of tips on that.
Okay.
Donna Salter, it's been fantastic talking to you again, and I know very well that you are going to become a regular on the Global Travel Channel podcast show, as you already are now. And also, while I've got you, I want to thank you immensely for passing on the details of a lot of people that you've recommended for us to have on the show, and they've all come our way, and they've been thoroughly amazing guests. So thank you for that contribution to our efforts here at the Global Travel Channel.
Well, I've listened to some of those podcasts, and I'm, most of the people that I have recommended, all of the people that I've recommended are really interesting people and are doing really interesting things around the world. And I have met them usually in my travels. Some of them I knew from before, but that's the one great thing about travel is you meet wonderful people who are doing exciting things. Just making a difference, really. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Please continue doing it because it's only enhancing our efforts to making sure that people understand what travel can do to change the world, and that's what the show is all about. So thank you very much, Donna Salter.
Thank you.
There you go. I don't know about you, but I'm going to look into ways in which I can get myself on a cargo ship. That sounds like an absolutely tremendous way to go from one side of the world to the other. That was Donna Salter, my guest today Well, that's the end of this particular episode of the Global Travel Channel podcast show. If you're looking for previous episodes, just head on over to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You'll find all of our previous episodes listed there where you can listen to them all. Or if you want to download them, you can go to Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and a host of other platforms that are all listed on our website. Okay, that's it for this episode. My name is Mark Philpott. Until next time, I wish you all bon voyage.